In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. Dear ones, I was so touched and overjoyed by the response to the first half of the reading of the life of Gerondissa Makrina from this book, Words of the Heart. I received many comments. This was one of the times where I broke my rule of not going to read the comments directly from the videos that I do. I read the comments from this one, and I read quite a few of them, and I was so happy to see so many people who were touched by her life. And I received quite a few emails from people who really appreciated that reading and went and bought this book. I can't recommend it enough. Buy this book. Her life is incredible. Her writings are absolutely amazing. So today I bring you, I also want to thank you, by the way. This was the one video where I said I don't normally ask people to like and share, but I asked you to share this video from the first part of the life, and many of you did. I know you did. The readings that I do, patristic and texts and saints' writings and lives, typically don't get that many views. This one's doing better than most of those. And I really appreciate that. I was so pleased because I want you to be blessed by this life. That's all there is to it. It's not for my sake. It's because Gerondissa Makrina's life is so miraculous and so beautiful. That's the only reason I want you to share it. So I ask you the same thing with this one. Please do share this life. I pray that this video does just as well as the first part. We'll read the second half today. We have here Gerondissa Makrina, who will kind of stand guard over my reading. As I said in the first one, forgive me for mispronunciations or stumblings, but obviously I'll do my best. So may we have the prayers and blessings of Gerondissa Makrina as we read the second half of her life from this beautiful book, Words of the Heart. Again, you can get this book at the monastery in Goldendale, Washington, St. John the Forerunner. I will include the link in the description for this video. Okay, we are at part 5. The founding of the holy monastery and her monastic tonsure. From the time that Maria lived in the world, she regularly corresponded with Gerondissa Joseph the Hesychist. Once, a spiritual sister of Maria's, named Fotini, ordered 2 wooden crosses from Gerondissa Joseph. When 3 acquaintances from Volos visited the elder on Mount Athos, he gave them the crosses before they could even ask for them, and told them that Maria would be tonsured, and Fotini would follow the married life. This prophecy of Gerondissa Joseph became a reality. In 1954, 5 of the 7 spiritual sisters, who had bonded with Maria and were living as nuns in the world, decided to settle somewhere together temporarily. During their efforts to find a place to live, they received a letter from Blessed Gerondissa Joseph telling them that they would search out many places seeking the appropriate location, but in the end, they would settle not far from Volos. Gerondissa Joseph described in detail how, after ascending a steep path, they would pass a little chapel. Beyond a village, they would find a simple house to begin the monastic life together, and God would bless what followed. Truly, the new informal sisterhood found a house in the village of Stagiatis in Pelion and stayed there temporarily. These first sisters who came together later received monastic tonsure, taking the names Synclitiki, Ephremia, Athanasia, Arsenia, and Melanie. About 3 years later, Sister Christonymphi and Maria joined them. Gerondissa Joseph the Hesychist undertook the spiritual guidance of this sisterhood for 7 years, until his blessed departure from this life on the Feast of the Dormition in 1959. The spiritual bond between the sisterhood and Gerondissa Joseph was unbreakable. He followed their progress with great care and assiduous prayers, rejoicing because they made diligent efforts, especially in obedience, vigil, and the prayer. The grace of God revealed to Gerondissa Joseph the spiritual progress of each sister. He would often describe his own spiritual states to them in his letters, greatly benefiting and motivating them towards greater spiritual struggles. During the first years of the newly established sisterhood, Maria continued to work, completing the years required to receive a pension that would be of help to the monastery, where they would eventually settle permanently. She continued to live in Nea Ionia and would travel 4.5 miles back and forth by foot to the village of Stagiatis. Because she did not want the sisters to have to go out into the world to deal with worldly affairs, she would take their handiwork and sell it for them. On returning home from this task one day, She was carrying a load of groceries weighing about 65 pounds and was extremely exhausted. However, instead of resting after a long day of labor, as soon as she arrived at the house, she left the groceries with the sisters and immediately did 400 prostrations and her prayer roll. As she would later relate, she felt so much grace and divine eros that it was impossible to describe. Because of this, she would always teach that in toil one finds God. At the age of 36, 3 years after the establishment of the informal community, having completed her duties in the world, Maria went to live permanently with the sisterhood. Soon, Gerondissa Ephraim's mother, Victoria, also joined them. The sisters then needed to decide on an abbess to whom they would show obedience. Maria was distinguished for her virtue, but there were sisters older than she was. They turned to Gerondissa Joseph the Hesychist through a letter, requesting that he pray about the matter. After a short time, Gerondissa Joseph, having seen a vision during his prayer, wrote to them, "God has chosen Maria, the good portion." In the vision, he saw a lush green meadow with Maria in the middle and little sheep all around her. At one point, an ape appeared and tried to bother the sheep, but Maria, with her staff in hand, chased it far away. Out of deep humility, Maria had difficulty accepting the position of abbess. Gerondissa Joseph then began to pray and ask God to reveal his will to Maria. Truly, one night, Maria saw in a vision the Honorable Forerunner and Baptist John ascending towards heaven, bearing a staff in his hand. She followed him. Behind her was a multitude of nuns, which Maria was trying to gather. At one moment, the Holy Forerunner paused, turned towards Maria, and placed the staff in her hands. After this vision, Maria accepted the shepherding of the sisterhood as the will of God. With the undertaking of her new duty, Gerondissa increased her struggles and labors for the love of Christ and for the soul which the Lord had entrusted to her, disregarding the threat of her fragile health. For instance, on one occasion, after very toilsome labor, she suffered significant respiratory hemorrhaging, causing her to cough up blood and placing her life in peril. In her exhaustion, she felt her soul ascending while seeing her body lying motionless. While her eyes were closed, she beheld the souls of departed people whom she had known since she was 5 years old. She found herself in a place of blessedness, and she realized that in this place souls knew one another and communicated with each other. The sisters did not inform Gerondissa Joseph of Gerondissa's condition promptly because there was no method of direct communication with him. After a few days, however, a letter arrived from Gerondissa stating that he and his co-ascetic, Father Arsenios, had received a revelation that Gerondissa was seriously ill, and they had intensified their prayers for the recovery of her health. Gerondissa also saw the two elders at her bedside every night, praying with their prayer ropes, "Lord Jesus Christ, heal thy servant," crossing themselves with every knot. When the sisters began to consider where to permanently establish the holy monastery, Gerondissa Joseph recommended that they go to Aegina to find Gerondissa Hieronymus of Cappadocia, who lived from 1883 to 1966, to seek his advice. He was a man of noetic prayer and an ascetic spirit who experienced such high spiritual states that one time during the divine liturgy, he even saw the Lamb as the divine infant calling him to dismember him. In obedience to Gerondissa Joseph, Gerondissa and Sister Syncletiki went to Aegina on behalf of the entire sisterhood to meet Gerondissa Hieronymus. When they arrived, Gerondissa Evpraxia, who cared for Gerondissa Hieronymus, received them. She was the sister according to the flesh of Gerondissa Arsenios, the co-ascetic of Gerondissa Joseph the Hesychist. In the beginning, Gerondissa Hieronymus tested their patience and humility, and then he received them. He blessed them, and said that he would always follow their progress noetically and pray for the sisterhood. He described to them in detail how the monastery would be built on a mountainside next to a ravine. Comforted by this blessed meeting, the sisters returned with joy and began little by little to look for the place to establish the holy monastery. Approaching the end of his life, Gerondissa Joseph the Hesychist gathered the fathers of his synodia to leave with them his last spiritual directions and orders as a sacred inheritance. He would indicate which members of their small brotherhood would establish new monastic communities, and which of the remaining fathers would follow each one of them. To the future Gerondissa Ephraim, he foretold that he would become an abbot, even though he was drawn to the hesychistic and ascetic life of the Athonite desert. Gerondissa Joseph asked him to take Father Athanasius, the elder's brother according to the flesh, and the novice Timothy Papaconstantinou, later Hieromonk Joseph, describing him characteristically. Keep him, he has fear of God and spiritual forcefulness. This Father Joseph, originally from Teleu, in the region of Almiro Volos, was later the liturgist of Gerondissa Makrina's monastery for over 20 years until his falling asleep on December 22, 2003. Finally, Geronda Joseph the Hesychist entrusted to the future Geronda Ephrem the task of continuing correspondence with the sisters and assuming the spiritual guidance of the sisterhood in Volos, as he himself had done previously. In 1962, a piece of property with a small building was purchased in the village of Portaria in Pelion, where the monastery would be built. When the construction first began, Gerondissa asked Sister Ephremia to bring the miracle-working icon of the Theotokos by foot from Stagiatis. Sick with a fever, the sister hesitated to carry the icon up the steep cobblestone road. Gerondissa assured her that she would pray for her and she would have no difficulty at all. Truly, Sister Ephremia did not feel the weight of the icon the entire distance she carried it, even though it was plated with a heavy silver covering. Instead, she felt that the icon was very light, and that she was scarcely touching it. In this way, the Panagia showed that she was pleased with her new home. From then on, the miraculous icon stayed at the construction site of the new monastery. One night, two men from the neighboring village of Kathiori, Socrates Kokalis and Nestor Agoros, beheld a bright pillar of light descending from the heavens and shining down upon the location where the monastery was being built. The next day, they went to this area to see exactly what was happening. When they met the sisters, they related the miracle they had seen the night before and discovered that the icon of the Panagia was situated at the very spot they indicated. In 1963, the construction of the holy monastery of Panagia Odigitria was complete and the property appropriately prepared so that the new sisterhood could take up residence there. Soon after this, Geronda Ephrem tonsured his mother, Victoria, giving her the name Theophano. Maria's tonsure followed, and she was given the monastic name of Saint Makrina, the sister of Saint Basil the Great. Gerondissa Theophano, whom Gerondissa Makrina honored throughout her monastic life, served as her sponsor. The tonsuring took place during the service of Compline. Gerondissa beheld a light as if the sun were rising from the holy altar of the church, illuminating everything as if it were daytime. She was in a state of theoria, and she beheld Christ crucified, and his immaculate blood flowing from his wounds into her heart. For 40 days, her mind was full of light and joy, and she shed endless tears. Her radiant spiritual state affected all those around her. Because of this spiritual transformation, Gerondissa desired to go up to a high mountaintop, as she would later say many times, and proclaim the grandeur of God, crying out for all people to become monastics in order to glorify God. Throughout the first days of her tonsure, whenever she saw the icon of the Last Judgment outside her cell, she would go into theoria, as if she were in the flames of hell. The transformation from the grace of the great and angelic schema lasted for some time. For many days, she did not want to taste any food, and for an entire year, she was not occupied by any earthly thoughts. 6. Virtues and spiritual experiences in the monastic arena. Gerondissa Makrina was adorned with an abundance of virtues which sprang forth from her Christ-centered life and her genuine ascetic conduct. She was especially distinguished for her warm-hearted hospitality and charity. In different ways, she discreetly helped and supported many suffering brethren who were in trouble and in need. She continuously counseled the sisters concerning charity. The Panagia will not abandon us. You give 1, and when you have faith, the Panagia gives back 10. Whatever we give from the Panagia's home is a blessing from the Panagia. This is why the grace of Our Lady Theotokos strengthens us and helps us. Whenever the sisters made fresh homemade bread, it was Gerondissa Makrina's great joy to give it out as a blessing. One time, a family came from Vespers of Cheese Fair Sunday, and when Gerondissa was seeing them off, she told one of the nuns to give them a loaf of bread, even though a sister had already told her it was the last loaf, and there was no time to make more since Clean Week was beginning. Gerondissa entirely trusted that the Panagia would provide for her monastery, and so the last loaf was given away. After Compline that evening, when the monastery gate had already been locked for that night. Someone came and rang the bell persistently. It was a baker known to the monastery. He had brought a carload of fresh bread. It was such a large amount that the sister had made rusks with it and ate them throughout the duration of that year's Great Lent. Gerondissa's virtue of hospitality showed forth when a pious hieromonk visited the monastery with 50 pilgrims from Heraleos, a suburb of Thessaloniki. They asked to stay the night so that they could attend the Sunday Divine Liturgy the next morning. Anyone else would have thought it impossible to host so many people, but Gerondissa took care to offer them food and improvised accommodations in 3 rooms, the only rooms available, where they could rest. Gerondissa was sorry that they did not have the ability to host the pilgrims as comfortably as she wanted, so she kept vigil all night in order to take part in their discomfort. When they went to the Divine Liturgy the next morning, the priest with the pilgrims hastened to thank Gerondissa, who, as they said, was vigilant all night long, ceaselessly passing among them, covering them so that they would not be cold. Gerondissa, however, informed them that she had not left her cell all night, and they realized that it was a miracle of the Panagia Odigitria. Before leaving that afternoon, they served the Paraklesis to honor the Most Holy Theotokos. A certain sister also related that she had seen the Panagia enter her cell that night, even though her door was locked. The Panagia approached both her and the other sister who were sleeping in that cell and said, "Oh, these are my girls." Gerondissa Makrina also had the gift of prayer, which she had embraced from childhood. Her soul found rest in prayer, and in prayers she entrusted all of her requests to God. One time, she entreated God with tears to show her how she should pray, so that her prayer would be pure and free from conceit, and thus with unhindered prayer she could be united with Him. That night an angel of the Lord appeared to her clothed all in white and taught her how a person should pray, depending on his spiritual state. According to what the angel showed her, when the soul feels perfect love for God, a person raises his hands high. When humility and remembrance of the passion of Christ take hold, a person crosses his arms and bows his head. When the soul feels extreme humility from the war of the passions, then a person prays with his hands behind his back like a convict. The angel then began to pray on his knees and to weep as if he were embracing the feet of Christ, showing how a person prays when he perceives his nothingness, and in this way he experiences inexpressible joy and consolation from God. A giant ladder then appeared in the air, the steps of which were very far apart. The angel told her to follow him, and holding her by the hand, they began to ascend. Little by little, a thick, black, tangible darkness, smelling like sulfur, engulfed them. As they ascended, it became more and more difficult for Gerondissa to breathe. They finally arrived at the prisons where the people with mortal sins were kept. In that inconsolable place of deep darkness, the moaning of the lost souls resonated, and the sight was horrifying. Lamenting and groaning echoed everywhere. For the rest of her life, Gerondissa could never forget that lamentation. When she came to herself, after living that experience, she was overcome with weeping. For 10 days, she could not hold back tears. On the one hand, she felt joy from the angelic presence and his teaching on prayer. On the other hand, she felt mourning from the dreadful vision following that visitation. She experienced even more compunction in her prayer. Then, she had no sense of time and shed abundant tears. Living hesychastically and practicing the prayer unceasingly, Gerondissa Makrina prayed for all people, especially for those she had known while living in the world. With great pain, she pleaded for the salvation of the souls of the departed who had not confessed, primarily, their deadly sins. In one such case, she also requested others to pray for the repose of the soul of Glikeria, an acquaintance of her from her youth. Glikeria could not withstand the hunger during the German occupation, and in order to survive, she began to make concessions until little by little she ended up in sin. With great sorrow, Gerondissa wondered about the condition of Glikeria's departed soul. One night, after intense prayer, she saw a fiery river, and in the middle of the river she saw Glikeria on a raft. She was calling out to Gerondissa, begging her for her prayers and help. "Help me, Gerondissa, I am burning." This image of Hades and Glikeria's desperate cries never left Gerondissa's mind, and compelled her to pray with greater pain of soul and contrition for the repose of souls who departed this world without confession and unprepared to meet God. Gerondissa's continual concern and fervent desire was the salvation of all mankind, and foremost her sisterhood. In order to carry out the ministry of governing the sisterhood, she asked God to grant her experiences so that she would not be teaching only from books, but also from her personal experience. In this way, her words would have greater effect on the sisters' souls. And the Lord granted her spiritual perception, teaching her with divine visions and heavenly experiences. Once, during the cherubic hymn on the feast of Palm Sunday, this took place sometime around 1985, while Gerondissa was kneeling in front of her Stasidi, she found herself noetically inside the holy sanctuary. She saw that the holy proskimidi was covered with a deep red material like velvet. On top of it was the holy chalice, and all around it were tongues of flame. In each fiery tongue she beheld scenes from the passion of Christ through his resurrection. As Gerondissa gazed in awe, a light with blinding brilliance poured out from the chalice, and for a few minutes she thought she had lost her sight. This experience of the uncreated light granted Gerondissa even greater precision and devotion towards the awesome mystery of the divine Eucharist. Gerondissa Makrina had great reverence for Saint Ephrem the Syrian, the saint of tears, and she regularly studied and delighted in his ascetical works. One day, the saint appeared in her cell as an ascetical elder wearing the angelic schema and carrying a sack over his shoulders. He introduced himself and called her to approach him. He blessed her, kissed her head, and disappeared. Immediately, Gerondissa felt like a young child, and she sensed a blessed warmth upon her face. Her joy lasted for many days. In addition to her own personal experiences, Gerondissa sought with pious discretion to learn of the spiritual experiences of other people, especially priests, in order to benefit herself and in turn to instruct the sisterhood. In her homilies to the sisters, she spoke with great awe and fear of God about the exceedingly great value of the divine liturgy. She would often say that the divine mystery cannot be compared with anything earthly. Moved by her deep reverence for the highest ministry of the priesthood, Gerondissa would ask any visiting priest what he experienced during the divine liturgy. Once, the blessed Gerondissa Gabriel, who lived from 1910 to 1994, of the holy monastery of the Transfiguration in Flamurios, Magnesia, visited the monastery. When Gerondissa asked him about the spiritual states that God grants during the divine liturgy, and especially about the vision of angels, Gerondissa Gabriel answered with simplicity, "How can we speak of these things, Gerondissa? You cannot understand. Our tongues cannot speak such things. We cannot describe it. It is something heavenly. Oh, what happens during the divine liturgy! Angels, archangels. The church fills with more angels than the number of our breaths." Continuing, the Reverend Elder wept with compunction and added that experiencing a vision of the Panagia is incomparably greater than the vision of the divine bodiless powers. With great faith and fervent prayers, Gerondissa never relaxed her vigilance, but unceasingly agonized over the spiritual progress and salvation of the sisterhood. Night and day she implored the Panagia for all the souls that she was responsible for, and the Panagia did not deprive her of her consolation and visitation. One time, during the cherubic hymn in the divine liturgy, while Gerondissa was kneeling and overcome with this anguish, she beheld the Panagia as a 15-year-old girl standing in the royal doors, her face bathed in otherworldly light. Just as in the icon of the Lady Quick to Hear in Gerondissa's cell, the Panagia held Christ as an infant. Gerondissa expressed her agony over the salvation of the sisterhood, and the Panagia smiled at her, immediately granting her a deep peace. The Most Holy Theotokos also guided her concerning practical matters and tasks of the monastery. One time, Gerondissa saw the Panagia in the kitchen showing her how to work, putting away dishes and tidying up the space in the blink of an eye. Because of this experience, Gerondissa would often say that the Panagia is a very good housekeeper and very quick, and she would urge the sisters to work carefully and quickly. Another time, as she was walking towards the chapel of the Panagia Odigitria to do her rule of prayer, she saw the Panagia as a nun, showing her how to perform her rule. With her strong, zealous, and compunctionate voice, Gerondissa greatly loved to chant hymns to Christ and the Panagia. She loved the dogmatic Theotokia from the Octoikos and the Apolitikia to the saints. She especially loved to chant the Troparion, "I desire, Panagia, the beauty of paradise, the sweet smells and the blossoms, the pleasant fragrances, and the voices of the angels when they hymn the Master." She would also be moved to deep compunction by the great Prokimenon, "What God is as great as our God?" as well as the Doxastikon of the Opostikon from the Vespers of Holy Friday, "Thou who coverest thyself with light as with a garment, which she would always ask to have chanted for her by any chanters who visited the monastery. When Gerondissa chanted, her face was illumined by the lofty meaning within the theology of the hymns, because she mystically experienced them at the time of the Divine Liturgy and in her personal prayers. 7. Gerondissa's acquaintance with holy contemporary figures of Orthodox monasticism. Throughout her years as abbess, our Gerondissa closely followed the tradition of the Holy Fathers preserved in the narrations from the Geronicon that say to emulate each other for spiritual benefit. Thus, with great zeal, she would visit contemporary monastic figures who were distinguished for their God-inspired and unerring teachings, as well as for their holiness of life. After 1967, Gerondissa and several of the nuns visited the holy monastery of the Panagia in Clisura of Castoria to receive the blessing and prayers of the holy ascetic Gerondissa Sofia Hotokoridou, who lived from 1883 to 1974. Gerondissa Sofia was recently glorified as a saint by our Holy Orthodox Church with May 6 as her appointed feast day. Living in continual communion with the Panagia, Saint Sophia gave herself over to superhuman asceticism while pretending to be a fool for Christ's sake. She would admonish all who visited her, especially young people, to give great attention to the subject of purity. Through all her hardships and asceticism, the Holy Spirit granted her the gift of clairvoyance, foresight, and miracle working. Saint Sophia received Gerondissa Makrina with great love and advised her regarding the spiritual struggle, monastic life, and the shepherding of the souls who came to the monastery. She advised Gerondissa to admonish everyone to make sincere confessions. You have a monastery, and you will give an account to God if people visit and you do not speak to them about how to know Christ. You will tell them that in the same way they clean their houses in the corners and cracks and throw out the garbage, so they must clean their souls. They should make sincere confessions to clean the house of their souls. To strengthen the faith of those present at that blessed visit, she told them of the miraculous surgical procedure that the Panagia and the saints did for her in September 1967. She showed them with her holy simplicity the scar in the form of a cross on her body. Gerondissa Makrina had a shawl with her, and as they left she placed it with reverence over the extremely hunched back of the saint, who was comforted and blessed her, saying, "Just as you covered me, likewise may your angel cover you, and may the Panagia cover you with her protection." Gerondissa frequently used St. Sophia's teachings when advising pilgrims. During that same time, after 1967, the Blessed Geronda Philotheos Zervakos, who lived from 1884 to 1980, visited the monastery twice with his pastoral ministry when his pastoral ministry brought him to the area. The monastery gave him the warmest reception and hospitality. Gerondissa spoke with him at length and was benefited by his grace-filled words and his spiritual experiences. Gerondissa also greatly honored Father Athanasios Mytileneos, who lived from 1927 to 2006, from the holy monastery Comniniu of Stomiu, Larissa, for his spirituality and his theological and dogmatic knowledge. She visited him in 1979 to receive his blessing. Father Athanasius' spiritual children brought his recorded homilies as a blessing to the monastery, which Gerondissa would often use in the sisters' gatherings. She held him in high regard for his great contribution to the Orthodox Church, and would often say how the blessed Father Athanasius spared no labor or pain, limiting his personal rest to a minimum in order to minister the divine word. In September to October of 1981, Geronda Ephrem of Kathanakia, who lived from 1912 to 1998, a blessed disciple of Geronda Joseph the Hesychist, stayed in a hospital for clergy in Athens for 1 month, undergoing treatment for a skin disease on his legs from which he had suffered for many years. His hospitalization became known in spiritual circles. Since the elder did not otherwise leave the holy mountain, many monastic communities, including women's monasteries, rushed to visit him and receive his teachings and blessing. Geronda Ephrem was accompanied by his first disciple, the hieromonk Joseph, who attended to him during his treatment, serving also as the doorkeeper of his room in order to preserve quiet for the patient. Gerondissa Makrina went to the hospital together with some of the sisters, and approaching Father Joseph in the hallway, they asked permission to see the elder. Father Joseph went into the room and informed the elder of the arrival of Gerondissa Makrina and her nuns. The elder's answer was emphatic. "Open the doors wide, my child. Gerondissa went in with great reverence towards the elder and with evident love and emotion. After taking the elder's blessing, they departed. Gerondissa's conduct made an impression on Father Joseph, as did the joy that he saw in his elder's face. Thus, when they returned to their skete on Mount Athos, he asked his elder where that mutual esteem derived from. The elder narrated how he met Gerondissa Makrina for the first time in 1974 in Thessaloniki, when she visited him again in the hospital with her sisterhood. That time, the elder was far away from Mount Athos for the first time after 38 years because of cyanosis, an illness caused by poisoning. Gerondissa's modest appearance and monastic manners had made an impression on him. Returning to his cell, he fervently prayed for Gerondissa and received a revelation that Gerondissa Makrina was at the same great spiritual height as the blessed Gerenda Joseph the Hesychist. Another time, when Gerenda Ephraim of Katanakia was praying for Gerondissa and her sisterhood, he saw two brilliant pillars above her monastery. In a spiritual manner, he was seeing the prayers of Gerondissa Makrina and Gerondissa Theophano. In July of 1990, a pilgrim going to Mount Athos passed by the monastery to speak with Gerondissa. When Gerondissa learned that he would be visiting Gerenda Ephraim of Katanakia, she sent a small gift of some nuts with him for the elder. The elder received the gift with great joy and a wide smile. "That Gerondissa, my child, is all fragrance," he told the pilgrim, referring to the purity of her heart. Gerondissa Makrina also had great reverence for two other contemporary holy elders, Saint Porphyrios Kavsokalivitis, who lived from 1906 to 1991, and Saint Paisius the Athonite, who lived from 1924 to 1994. She visited Saint Porphyrios in 1984 in Athens with the purpose of asking him to bless her hand, which had been injured from a fracture, so she could avoid having surgery that would be dangerous due to her diabetes. Instead of addressing the issue of her hand, the saint only asked for the names of her sisterhood. As Gerondissa named the nuns, Saint Porphyrios, with his gift of clairvoyance, revealed the spiritual state of each sister as she was being named. In the winter of 1986, accompanied by Gerondissa Fevronia and other nuns, Gerondissa Makrina visited the holy monastery of Saint John the Foreigner and Metamorphosi of Chaldiki to take the blessing of Saint Paisius the Athonite. As soon as they met, Gerondissa Makrina made a full prostration to the saint, and he immediately did the same. Saint Paisius would not get up if Gerondissa did not get up first. They had spiritual unity, and they could each sense the spiritual state of the other. The humility of Saint Paisius was evident above all from the words he said a few moments later, referring to Gerenda Ephraim. "Why did you come to me? You have the first prize. What can I tell you? You have the admonitions of your Gerenda." Gerondissa Makrina also had great reverence for the blessed Saint Iacobos Salikis, who lived from 1910 to 1991, whom she visited at the holy monastery of Saint David in Limni of Evia in 1988 and 1990. During the first visit, the blessed elder was very ill. In addition to his other illnesses, he suffered greatly from vertigo and did not go down for the divine liturgy that day. The fathers of the monastery told the sisters it would be impossible for him to see them. With unshakable faith and boldness, Gerondissa said, "Pray with your prayer ropes. The elder will come and give us his blessing." Finally, Father Kyrillos, the future abbot of the monastery, told the elder that Gerondissa Makrina and her sisterhood were waiting for him. With great effort, but also with tremendous joy, St. Iacobos came down and welcomed the sisters, admonishing them for a long time while standing. At one point, addressing the lay people also present, he said, "If I were in your place, I would go by foot to the monastery every morning to receive the blessing of Gerondissa Makrina, and then I would go off to my work." Finally, bidding the sisterhood farewell from the gate, as they got on the bus to leave, he chanted, "Adam sat across from paradise and lamented." During their second visit to the holy monastery of St. David in the summer of 1990, St. Iacobos received this sisterhood with evident reverence towards Gerondissa, saying, "Gerondissa Makrina is not only your mother, she is our mother too, and the mother of the entire church. So great is my reverence and respect for Gerondissa Makrina that if I were in Volos, I would go every morning to kiss her hand. Every morning during the divine liturgy, we take out a portion for Gerondissa Makrina and her sisterhood. That portion is taken by an angel of the Lord, and we believe this, and he takes it to the throne of God. We pray for all souls, for Gerondissa Makrina, for the nuns, for all people, for good health, for those who are suffering, and for sinners. God gives his blessing. The saint blessed Gerondissa personally, saying, "May he give you as much health as he wills until your time is finished. May God grant you good paradise. My Gerondissa, may you be numbered with your blessed sisterhood among the wise virgins." St. Jacobo spoke at length with Gerondissa about his miraculous spiritual experiences and states of divine grace. When the sisters were leaving and asked for his blessing, he blessed them with a cross that Gerondissa had sent him as a gift. 8. Mother of the Church. The grace of God and her personal spiritual struggle for the perfection of her soul made Gerondissa Makrina truly worthy to be distinguished as a mother not only to the sisterhood, but as mother of the Church, as the discerning St. Jacobos had stated. The holy monastery of Panagia Odigitria flourished under the illumined guidance of Gerondissa Makrina, and by God's providence, in time, it became the divine nursery from which other holy monasteries in Greece, the United States, and Canada were founded or re-established. First, in 1974, the holy monastery of the Archangel Michael in Thassos was re-established as a metochion of the monastery of Philotheo on Mount Athos. 12 years later, in 1986, a monastic synodia was sent to the holy monastery of the Honorable Forerunner in Ceres. Later, in 1995, the holy monastery of the Honorable Forerunner in Nausa was re-established, and in 1996, the holy monastery of Panagia Glykophiliousa was founded in Rapsani in Larissa. All of these monasteries were populated by nuns from Gerondissa Makrina's monastery in Portaria. With the blessing of the Greek Archdiocese of America and the metropolis of Canada, Greek Orthodox monasteries were founded in the United States and Canada under the spiritual guidance of Gerondissa Ephrem of Philotheo Monastery. In 1989, nuns from Portaria founded the first monastery, the Holy Monastery of the Nativity of the Theotokos in Saxonburg, Pennsylvania. Then in 1995, the Holy Monastery of the Honorable Forerunner was established in Goldendale, Washington. Also, two sister monasteries in Greece, the Holy Monastery of the Archangel Michael in Thassos and the Holy Monastery of the Honorable Forerunner in Ceres, were counted worthy to contribute new monastic sisterhoods to Greece as well as to North America, each formed by a nucleus of nuns who began their monastic journey at the Holy Monastery of Panagia Odigitria. As a most blessed spiritual mother, Gerondissa Makrina nurtured a multitude of nuns with the hesychastic tradition as the monastic ideal. In addition, with her sacrificial goodwill, she offered her nuns as missionaries and vigilantly followed the struggles and progress of the newly established monasteries with her guidance and fervent prayers. In 1992, despite all her health problems, she traveled to Pennsylvania to visit the ever-memorable Gerondissa Taxiarchia, who lived from 1938 to 1994, and to strengthen that first monastic sisterhood. Gerondissa Taxiarchia was a very blessed and virtuous nun, endowed by God with many gifts, which she cultivated with genuine spiritual struggle, and she was thus able to benefit many people. She fought the good fight and is lovingly remembered as a holy Gerondissa, setting the example of perfect obedience, patience in struggles, and self-sacrifice, fruit which grew from her true love towards God and her neighbor. During her flight over the Atlantic, inspired with awe by the vast sky and ocean, Gerondissa Makrina was captivated by the theoria of God's great compassion. Just as the ocean and the sky have no end, so much more is the compassion of God unending. As God's compassion is unending, even so must man's patience be without end. In America, she experienced firsthand the struggle to spread the Orthodox monastic tradition, and her soul rejoiced seeing even young children learning to say the prayer. 9. Illness. In the summer of 1987, Gerondissa was diagnosed with colon cancer. Before her surgery, she went with great piety and faith to Rustica in Rethymno, Crete, to be blessed with the Holy Cross by Father Stavros Sakarakis. While she was there, she intensely experienced the miraculous energy of the Holy Cross and felt the cancer shrinking. She went to London for surgery, accompanied by Gerondissa Ephrem, Sister Ephremia, and Sister Makrina, a former charge nurse at the Evangelismos Hospital in Athens. Gerondissa had taken with her the icon of the Holy Unmercenary Healers, which had been given to her as a blessing from Gerondissa Joseph the Hesychast. The rules of the hospital did not allow companions to stay with patients during the night. Because Gerondissa Makrina did not know English and therefore could not communicate on her own, she begged the Panagia to illumine the nurses and to send them to her when she was in need of help after the surgical anesthesia wore off. For several nights after the surgery, two unknown physicians visited Gerondissa. They appeared wearing white medical uniforms and were dark-skinned and spoke Arabic. With white handkerchiefs in their hands, they helped her clean out the phlegm that had built up from the surgery. At first, Gerondissa did not realize who the doctors that served her were. She asked Gerunda Ephraim and the sisters to find and thank them and give them a blessing for all the help they had given her. However, the description Gerondissa gave of the two doctors did not match any of the doctors who worked at that hospital. They all realized then that it was a miracle of the holy unmercenary healers, Cyrus and John, whose memory was commemorated on the day of her surgery. Gerondissa also saw two young women who looked like nurses wearing white uniforms and white hats, not blue like the nurses at that hospital. They were standing at the foot of her bed, and they consoled her with their sweet countenances. When Gerondissa wondered who they were, she heard an inner voice informing her that one was her guardian angel, and the other was her angel of the great schema. Her guardian angel also informed her that she would not die now, but in 7 years. For the duration of her 17-day stay in the hospital, being human, she experienced the pain of the illness. But she was not without divine consolation. She explained how she felt a soft breeze that cooled her face and comforted her. She experienced a heavenly grandeur in her soul. At the same time, she felt the prayers of those praying for the recovery of her health. She later described how she noetically saw everyone who was praying for her passing before her like an army battalion. Before returning to Greece, Gerondissa Makrina and her companions visited Gerunda Sophroni Sakharov, who lived from 1896 to 1993, at the Holy Patriarchal Stavropegic Monastery of St. John the Baptist in Essex. Gerunda Sophroni warmly welcomed them and provided them with hospitality equal to that of Abraham. 10. The Blessed End. When the 7 years after Gerondissa's surgery drew to a close, remembering the words of her guardian angel, she began to say that the time of her departure was approaching. In the gathering of the sisterhood, she related that she had seen the late Gerondissa Taxiarchia coming to take her. When asked if Taxiarchia was approaching quickly or slowly, she answered quickly. In another gathering, she related that she saw herself walking, accompanied by a youth. As they were walking, they saw a vigil lamp that was flickering, and the oil was running out. Gerondissa rushed to add oil and light it, but her companion hindered her, saying that its oil is finishing, informing her that he meant the oil from the vigil lamp of her life. One of Gerondissa's lifelong desires was to venerate the holy belt of the Panagia. When she learned that the fathers of the holy monastery of Vatopedi, where this relic is treasured, had brought the holy belt from Mount Athos to the mainland, she expressed the desire to venerate it. The holy belt arrived at her monastery, where a fitting reception had been prepared in anticipation. With visible emotion, profound reverence, and compunction, Gerondissa took the holy relic in her hands and carried it to the Catholicon of the monastery, which is dedicated to the remission of the Theotokos. She venerated it and said, "Now that the holy belt has come, I will depart." Her blessed repose came 15 days later. The week before her departure, one of the older sisters, Sister Ephraimia, while washing Gerondissa's feet, heard her say, "In a few days, these feet will be in the earth." During her last days, she communicated with many acquaintances on the phone and invited them to the monastery, where she bestowed on them her last words of guidance and gave them items from her cell as a blessing. By divine providence, many others came to visit and receive Gerondissa's blessing without being informed of her state of health and approaching end. Still others she contacted herself, expressing her desire to see them, without, however, revealing the reason. During this period, she had difficulty breathing due to cardiac insufficiency. At nighttime, when her condition was at its worst, she would see a young girl with braids, about 12 years of age, come out of the icon of the Panagia, quick to hear, that was in her cell. The girl would approach and cover her. As Gerondissa gazed upon the Panagia, her labored breathing subsided, allowing her to fall asleep. Gerondissa had not told anyone about this, nor did she allow any sister to stay in her cell, so as not to lose the heavenly companionship of the Panagia. One night, Sister Ephraimia, worried about Gerondissa's labored breathing, quietly slipped in onto the couch of her cell. At one point, when Gerondissa sat up and saw her, she immediately scolded her and unintentionally revealed to her that due to her presence, she was deprived of the visitation of the Panagia that night. The day of Gerondissa's repose was the Sunday of the Holy Fathers of the First Ecumenical Council, June 4th, 1995, May 22nd on the old calendar. Hindered by her illness, she did not attend church that day. In the afternoon, although it was difficult for her, she got up to bid farewell to some pilgrims and then went back to her cell. Around 1:30 p.m., a few sisters went by her cell to see her. Gerondissa, sitting in her chair, began to speak about death. She spoke of her synodia in heaven, Gerda Joseph the Hesychist, her first spiritual father, and each sister of the monastery who had already fallen asleep, whom she listed by name. After 2 p.m., Gerondissa went to lie down, but very soon she got up because of her discomfort. Already, Gerondissa's lungs were filling with fluid, which could be heard in her breathing. One of the sisters who had medical knowledge took Gerondissa's blood pressure and found it extremely high. She gave her some medication and oxygen. During this time, the rest of the sisterhood was informed of her condition. Some began the paraklesis to the Theotokos, and others ran to help. Gerondissa was quiet and was breathing with difficulty. Her face was a deep rose color, and she was perspiring profusely. Her blood pressure continued to rise, and she asked one of the sisters to call for the monastery's priest, Father Joseph, to come and bless her with the holy lance and the holy relics. Those were her last words. Soon her doctor, Dr. Nicholas Baldimsis, arrived and diagnosed acute inflammation of the lungs with indefinable blood pressure. He tried to help with CPR, but the damage to the heart was irreversible. In a short while, the electrocardiogram showed that Gerondissa had passed away. She had already given up her holy soul. During these moments, one of the sisters contacted the Reverend Gerenda Ephraim, who was in America, to inform him of Gerondissa's condition, and during the conversation her soul departed to the Lord. When Gerenda heard of her departure, he said with conviction, "Gerondissa is ascending in brilliant light to the throne of Christ without hindrance from the toll houses." In the cell of our Blessed Mother, the sisters venerated her holy forehead, which was wet with perspiration and fragrant. "She who hath been translated hence hath crossed life's ever-troubled sea, and has sailed into thy haven through faith." From the funeral service for monastics. Her venerable body remained in the Catholicon of the monastery for 3 days until the funeral service and burial. Throughout the reading of the Holy Psalter, Trisagion prayers for the departed were done by the arriving hierarchs, abbots, hieromonks, and priests from Mount Athos and other holy monasteries around Greece. Many abbesses and nuns from different monasteries, as well as a multitude of mourning lay people who had benefited from her prayers, counsels, and guidance, came to venerate our Reverend Mother. The divine blessedness of peace was imprinted on the holy countenance of the venerable Gerondissa. She was present in the Holy Spirit amongst those gathered, giving their souls divine consolation and grace, and abundance of tears streamed quietly from everyone's eyes, springing from feelings of sorrow and joy, mourning and resurrection, which unexplainably alternated in their hearts. Truly, throughout the entire 40 days that followed, the sisters quietly lived the spiritual experience of joyful mourning that is spoken of by the Holy Fathers and ascetics of the Church. This spiritual state was a gift from God, through the prayers of the Venerable Mother, to strengthen and console them. The funeral took place on Tuesday, June 6th, or May 24th in the old calendar. After the burial, a meal of love was provided for all those attending in memory of our ever-memorable Mother. A multitude of monastics and lay people flooded the monastery to pay tribute with their honor and love, to bid farewell to their teacher, benefactress, and mother, and to see her off to the heavenly homeland to meet the bridegroom whom she loved. And this ends the incredible life of Gerondissa Makrina. A few pictures to end with. God willing, I will have by the end of the year an icon of Gerondissa Makrina hand painted here in my prayer corner somewhere. I'll have to rearrange some things, but it'll be worthwhile. May we have the continuous prayers and blessings of Gerondissa Makrina from heaven, where she undoubtedly awaits the second coming of our Lord. Amen.